Okay, great. Okay. So you probably have heard about, or yeah, originally I'm from Switzerland. Lived in Japan for about 8 years. Got quite interested in photography while I was in Japan. And now for 20 plus years, I'm in the Silicon Valley. And yeah, like photography a lot. So the talk today is about creative composition in the field or on location. That's in contrast to a controlled setting in a studio, right? So it's all about like just going out into the field. And we will look at creating compelling imagery from 2 points. I split it up in 2 topics. One is the tangible compositional elements, and one is the intangible compositional elements. So it's important that first you get a good base so that you are quite familiar with the tangible ones. And then once you feel comfortable, that you move over to the second one, the intangible one.
Could you speak up, please?
Speak up? Okay. Well, I have a little soft voice, hopefully. You guys can hear me.
There are some seats at the front.
Is the problem online or in here, in the room? Okay, I see. Yeah. Okay, so, but before we begin, so I sometimes get asked, what camera should I use? And I let you read this. I won't read it for you. And that's quite interesting. And so basically what it means, it doesn't really matter what camera you have. Nowadays, most people just have their cell phone in the pocket, which is totally fine. There are a few exceptions where you still need a regular DSLR or mirrorless camera, or maybe a fast lens. But all in all, it's pretty like you're pretty much set with mobile phone camera. They became quite good in the last 5 years or so. Okay, so we will drink from the fire hose. So lots and lots of material. Don't worry, so the presentation is available online, so you can use it as a reference later on. Today you can take notes, but you will have the presentation available, so you can take notes that's not in the presentation. Also, please ask questions at any time. I like to make it interactive. Okay, so first the tangible ones. As you can see, it's a long laundry list. We go one after the other. And at the end here, 19, we have combining the compositional elements. So that's like a quiz. So we'll see on certain photos what of these previous compositional elements we cover on a certain photo. Here you see the tangible ones. It's more analytical logic. So it's left brain. And then here you see right brain heavy. That's then the intangible ones. That's more about the feeling, etc. And so again, so focus on the intangible elements once the tangible become like second nature. So first one, rule of third. I probably don't have to go into detail. Everybody heard about this, is familiar with this. 9 blocks, and you put your subject or points of interest either on a line or on a point. So that's an example, driving maybe 80, 90 miles an hour on the Black Rock Desert. So it's a motion blur shot. That's actually the Black Rock, so it's in Nevada. So you see it's a rule of third, the horizon line and this line here. So for this dancer here, I could just take a shot head on or straight on. So basically cropped around like this. So it's basically head on. But if I do it in the rule of third, it looks kind of more balanced. Right? Here, now we'll flip through other ones. You will immediately see where the rule of third is. Horizon again. This train line is on one side. This silo here on the other side. Here the pigeon point lighthouse is in a rule of third. The horizon again. Now, second one is framing, or how to anchor the image. What is the foreground, background? So here, one concept is the frame. So here that's the Hoover Tower. So the main subject here is the Hoover Tower and the blood moon. And here I decided to frame it just with these tree branches. Yes?
How often do you take a picture first and then come back home to do the post-production to cut it out?
So how, if I understand correctly, so how, if I do it in post-production, the cropping, or when I take the shot?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good question. So I usually decide when I'm out in the field, and I try to take it a little bit wider than I intend to, so that I have some room for cropping, right?
So some of this can be done later on.
Right, right. So on this shot, the original one, I might have a little bit more of the tree, and then I decide, okay, let's cut a little bit. Yes.
See the ones with the plants in the bottom of the picture, that you purposely included that at that.
Yep. So I will repeat the question because of the people online. So the question was, there are some plants at the bottom of the image in front of the tower, if that is on purpose. And that could be on purpose. There are some other ones as well. I probably didn't pay attention to this one. I think it's debatable. In this case, maybe if I would do the post-processing again, I might remove that because it's a distraction. But on the left side and the right side, in this case, I think that builds a nice frame, right? So in this picture here, so it's basically anchored, and the anchor is here. You see this walk or this trail, dangerous slippery trail, right on the right side here. So that basically nicely anchors the photo or the scene. It also gives a depth of to the whole scene, right? So if I would point my camera just maybe some of the trees here, meaning if I would point the camera more to the left, I wouldn't have that depth, impression of depth, right? So it's always good to think about how can I bring depth to a scene. On this picture here, that's actually on Hawk Hill. We went out shooting for sunset shooting, and just by pure coincidence, at sunset, the sun was right shining through the tunnel. That only happens in 2 days a year, in spring and in fall. So we were just lucky, right? So here, the anchoring you see here, I anchor it the wall on the right side, on the left lower corner. And then the left wall here, it's a little bit in the shade, but in the lower left corner, lower right corner and left corner. So that's how the picture here is anchored. This also gives a perception of depth.
Were the shadows actually like that?
Would
Were the shadows of the people actually?
Yes, the question was, were the shadows like this? And yes, they were. It's a longish tunnel. They were further away. I took the shot with a long lens, so that brings everything, compresses everything a little bit. And yeah, because the sun is just shining through. The camera is actually in the shade, but the people are in the sun and cast this long shadow. So here, that's in Switzerland, a couple of years back, in my mom's kitchen. Here, the framing is on the left side and right side. So this is now with a fisheye lens, so that's where we have this distortion. I could have taken it out in post, but I decided it looks kind of interesting with the distortion, right? So it's kind of round, but that brings also again a nice frame to the city. And you have a lot of depth here. You see some details in the front. She painted on porcelain, so that's some of her work. She's reading a newspaper, and in the garden in the back is her partner, right? so that gives like several layers of depth to the scene. So then about foreground and background. So here we have a clear foreground, the flowers, wildflowers, and we have a background, a nice rocky mountain in the back. So that's actually in Switzerland, very close to my hometown. So that's on the top of one mountain. The next mountain range on the left, that's where my hometown is. So here, the focus is, the main subject is probably the wildflowers. But it's a nice combination also with the background. So technically here, what I did from the same vantage point, well, you wouldn't be able to take a photo where the foreground is sharp, you're so close, and the background is sharp, right? What I did, I took two shots, one focus on the flowers, the same vantage point, and one focus on the background. And then in post, I do so-called focus stacking. There's automated focus stacking software, but there's so much going on with the flowers that wouldn't work with automatic focus stacking. So that's done in post manually. And that's last of this element here, compositional element. So here we have clearly a foreground, which is this, what is it called again? Sun Voyager, yes. So that's in Reykjavik. That's one iconic sculpture in Reykjavik. That was the last day before we left a couple of years ago, not with John, that was a different trip. And while we were packing the luggage, I've seen that the sky lights up. And so I was rushing with the rental car to this spot here to take this shot. So usually over here, that wouldn't be possible. Over here, the like sky lighting up, it happens, that lasts for maybe 5 minutes or maybe 10 minutes longest, right? Up there, you're quite high up north. So the angle where the sun is going down is very shallow. That means the sunset can take hours, like an hour or two. So I had enough time to get the shot. Right? Iceland, yes. So now back to the topic here on compositional elements. So the main topic is the foreground, right? So it's nice. But then on the other hand, also the main thing you could argue is the sky, the lit up sky, right? So now, which one is the main focus? So that's a little tension that you mainly get in the viewer looking at this, right? So think about that. So sometimes it's a little bit overload, right? I would say that that's just about at the limit. So it's a little bit of both, which is maybe not so good. It's better to have, like in the previous shot here, it's clearly the flowers. That's the main subject, right? Here, it could be one or the other, right? So it's usually better if one subject or one item in the photo is the main subject. Just, yeah, that's one thing to consider. Okay, now next topic is vantage point. So if you just begin shooting, you always shoot from eye height, like click, 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 right? But often it might be nice to just go low or go high, right? With cameras, with many cameras nowadays, you have like these flip screens, right? And with this, you can take photos like that, right? Or then, of course, with a tripod. So let's look. On this case, that's in Switzerland, one of the famous viaducts called Landwasser Viaduct in the eastern part of the Swiss Alps. I used fisheye lens, which kind of distorts that that bridge here, and which also distorts, makes the lower part like kind of curved, which brings kind of a nice dynamic, and also which highlights this, which makes the structure even look bigger, right? So here and I put the camera on the tripod very low, right? It was longer exposure, so I put it on a tripod and it was very low, right? So that way you get the foreground nice, and you get like this imposing big structure. That's the opposite, a high vantage point. It looks like taken from the airplane with downtown San Francisco here, but that's actually from the top of Mount Tam, or Mount Tamalpais, right? So that's with a long lens, so it's getting stuff close by. And you see the fog rolling in. So that sometimes as a high vantage point looks nice.
When you say long lens, how long is it?
I can't remember like how many millimeters or how much I zoomed in, but that was taken with a 55 to 210 crop sensor, which is about 35 millimeter to 300 millimeter full frame. But I can't remember like how much I zoomed in. So here, that was last month. Every year at Stanford, there's a powwow, a big powwow, where all the native Indians gather. They come from Canada, from all over the US. And it's quite a nice experience. So we went there now already a couple of times. And for this shot here, I used to use the long lens. And I could have taken eye shots, so then my eyes and his eyes would be at the same level. But here the message is, hey, this is a person who is probably very proud of his heritage. And how can I emphasize that? Okay, I go low and shoot from low up, right? That shows like, you can see that he's quite a proud man. Here, the camera is actually the lower part of the camera body is touching the water. So it's a small water puddle, not big, but it's touching the water. And again, with the flip here, you just do it like this, and you can nicely see exactly what you're looking at, right? And so I put it low so that it's ready for a small water puddle. But the lower you go on the water puddle, the bigger it seems, right? The nicer reflection you get. That's the idea there. Then here it's just a little bit experimenting. So usually you would, at eye level, just a shot. That's at the tower in the De Young Museum in San Francisco. And here I decided just to do a level shot, but very low, and just get the feet. Right? Here, similar shot that's in the Valley of Fire in Nevada. So I worked with him. He was an excellent programmer. Yeah, so we took the shot, and I instructed him how to stand. And then here you can see like him standing kind of self-confident, right? Even though there's a danger approaching in the back. And here, it's a small animal, right? So if you just, from eye level, take a shot down, it's, yeah, not so much interesting. Here, I want to show how this animal sees the world. Same eye level like the little dog. Here, I'm using a super fisheye, a circular fisheye lens that sees 210 degrees. And that's at Hakone Garden, a bush about this size. And so here I just went with the camera into the bush, right? From the outside, you only see leaves, right? So I went inside the bush. And so now you can see the stem. So that looks, and there's a little water flow, right?
It looks like a painting.
It looks like a painting. Yeah, okay, that's a good point. It looks like a painting because it is HDR processed. So all the photos that you see here are HDR processed. Most of the time, I do the HDR processing just to enhance the micro contrast or local contrast. not to get the HDR look. So a typical HDR photo is like totally overblown. So most of the time I do very natural looking HDR. And in this case here, I made it a little bit more paintery. So you have control with HDR processing. And here I chose a little bit more paintery version.
I took it with a tripod, and how many shots did you take?
Question is a tripod and how many shots? No, so this was handheld and single shot. Right, so with HDR, you don't need multiple shots. You just can do HDR processing with a single shot.
Within the camera.
No, okay, that's a good question. HDR shot within the camera. Yeah, so iPhone or mobile phones, they have in-camera HDR applications. DSLR and mirrorless also have HDR applications built in or that you can download. Don't use those. That's crap. Right, so it's much better to download the photo on your desktop or laptop, do the proper HDR processing because you have much more control.
So you download a single raw image.
Right, so that's, if I download a single raw. So, right, so by default, cameras produce JPEG. If you don't want to do heavy post-processing, it's always better to use the raw. So set the camera to save in raw file or both. So I set it, the camera to always save both. For the same shot, I have a JPEG and a raw. For just a quick publishing, I use the JPEG. If you do post-editing, I usually use the raw file.
And from that raw file, do HDR on single images.
Yes, on this question, if I do the HDR processing on the single raw, the answer is yes.
Are you doing that in Photoshop or Lightroom or a different program?
So if I do Photoshop, Lightroom for HDR processing, actually I use a specific HDR software called Photomatics Pro. But there are also Aurora, HDR Aurora, there are different ones. So just use any of the dedicated HDR software to do the HDR processing. I have actually another talk on HDR, so that's also available online. Ask me afterwards if you are interested in that. So here, vantage point just straight up, again with the same 210-degree view lens, circular fisheye lens. So that's at Hakone Garden in Saratoga. That's the so-called lower house with a nice stone garden behind this wall. And just overhead is like this huge oak tree. And yeah, if you look up, it looks big, but then here with that circular fisheye lens, I could actually manage to capture the whole tree. Then also don't forget to get close, right? So that's a dandelion, and I went just very close. Here a vantage point. So that we were in Iceland a couple of years back. Model the ex of my son, and we were planning a photo shoot where we both were standing in the water. You will see the photo later, but here that was before the actual photo shoot. So it was kind of cold. It was after midnight, and she was kind of cold. So I thought, that kind of looks interesting. So instead of just taking the shot like this, I positioned myself so that the horizon line and the coat line matches, right? Which looks kind of interesting. So just think how you can play around or experiment to produce an interesting scene, simply by changing your vantage point. Here, that's what's it called? A memorial tower in London of the Great Fire. There's a tower. It's kind of a narrow tower, and you just go up, and that's the view from the very top straight down. So it's relatively small tower, so I could just extend my arm and take a shot with the camera just straight down.
I've seen similar images, they put a center at the rule of third.
Yes, right. So the comment was he has seen a similar image where the center it's off center in the rule of third. That is correct. Yeah. So I could do also rule of third. That actually might look quite interesting here. You see it's like a snake form here, right? Or a snail form. So you could put the center of the hole here in the upper right. So you get more of the snail, the end of the snail. So that could look interesting too. That's a good point. Okay, so next one is proportions and compression. So always think about what proportions are good in a scene. And now let's go look at some examples. So here the main topic is the people, celebration, like the mood, nice mood in a restaurant. That's by the way, Yan can cook. And so here the main subject are the people. So that's why they're quite big here. So it's just natural to take a photo like this. I also thought a little bit about anchoring. So that builds an anchor. The people at the bottom and on the left, right? That anchors the photo. And so that you see the focus is the chef, cook here, owner of the restaurant, and Yan. So now in contrast, this image here, right? So the three people are tiny, right? So that's at Trona Pinnacles towards sunset. So where the people are, it's already in the shade, but the mountain in the back is still in the sun. And so here the people are tiny, but that's actually good. So I could have zoomed in more, but it's better like that. So that basically says, oh, that's a vastly big landscape, and the mountain here is big, it never ends, right? So that's the message that I can get across simply by thinking about the depth and yeah, the proportions. Yes.
You took this picture, these people happen to be there, so you just.
Yes. Right. So the question was, when I took the photo, did these people just happen to be there? That yes, the answer is yes. So often you have to wait maybe a little bit, or you're just lucky, right? So that you get actors in your in your composition playing without knowing. Yes. That's a single shot as for the scene, but I don't remember if this is bracketed exposure or not for HDR processing. So for this dynamic range here, a single raw is probably sufficient. Okay, so here on this shot, you just see like a highway coming out of nowhere and a truck, and then, well, a big truck and a small truck, right? And here I totally zoomed in, so 300 and something millimeter equivalent full frame. And so in this shot, you see everything is compressed, right? You see here on the road, stuff is compressed. And then, yeah, it's kind of interesting, this blue and white, and then just this big wall that never ends in the back, right? So that highlights, okay, so I'm traveling in California, long like trip on the road. So that gives me mainly this impression. Okay. So again, also here I could have zoomed out more, but I wanted to get that compression, right?
So the back of the rocks are bluish. Is that tone?
Yeah, so that was, no, it's still in the sun. I thought it was maybe after sunset, but it's not. Yeah, so that mountain was a little in the bluish side. Maybe. Okay, so black and white shot in Mojave Desert. So John and I went to Mojave Desert for a rocket launch. And after rocket launch, we first scouted out this road. I knew about this road here. I want to take a photo. So first we went on the other side, shot that way with a long lens, compression. And then we went up on this side and back. And so then this turned out kind of interesting. And also if you wait a little bit, then maybe something interesting happens. And here's a lonely motorcycle rider. So it's like the easy rider concept, right? Here, another compression shot that's in Japan. In Japan, in one of these old towns, well-preserved old towns. In Japan, people in the past and also nowadays, they lived in quite a cramped space. And that's, with applying the compression, that's a message you get here. People live in a very cramped space. Another example of long lens, like compression, that's surprisingly a single shot. It looks like Photoshop, but it's actually like that, right? So that's in Macau. There is a casino hotel. What was it called?
Grand Lisboa.
Yeah, the Grand Lisboa. So Macau was a colony of Portugal. So lots of names are Portuguese. So that's a Grand Lisboa. It's the biggest skyscraper hotel in Macau. And you can see here the contrast, right? So yeah, this skyscraper is basically looks like a flower, right? So that opens up on both sides. But from this narrow road, you only see the left side of the skyscraper. That's why it looks a little strange, like Photoshop, but it is actually like that. And here, what you see again, also living space is cramped, or you also like the colonialists who have the power, the money. And then in the front, you see the locals that live in a cramped space. So that's a message that you can read from this photo. So here is with a 600 millimeter lens on a 900 millimeter, meaning on a crop sensor camera, meaning it's 900 millimeter, right? And from a fairly distance, so this is actually the proportion, right? The moon appears very big in comparison to the Lick Observatory, and that's simply because of the very long lens. And if you go even further away, you see that the moon on the next shot is the same size. But see here, the Lick Observatory is this size, and here the Lick Observatory is even bigger, right? That's because I'm further away. So the proportions change again. So this, in fact, is from the Open Space Preserve and 10 miles distance. Okay, now let's go into balance. So one is symmetrical, and you can have symmetrical balance like horizontal and also vertical. This one is a horizontal symmetry. Symmetry is built by just this lazy Susan, like on a round table in a Chinese restaurant. Here, the symmetry you get through water reflection. The sky is lighting up. That's in Switzerland. So I was actually in this old town here shooting. Then I looked up and said, oh, the light is kind of, the sky is lighting up. So I rushed around, I run around the lake here to get this vantage point. That's another reflection shot, like symmetry, Maker Faire. Another one here at the local campus, Broadcom. And here, that's an example of a symmetry left and right, so vertical symmetry. That's at the Sargans Castle in the east part of Switzerland. Here one comment, see like this shot here shows inside and also outside, and everything is the proper luminance. With a single shot, you could never do that, right? So here you actually need 3 or 4 exposures. Like some exposures properly exposed for the inside. You see here that the grain structure of the wood of the wall, and then some other exposures for the outside. So here, because of the very big dynamic range, you need to have multiple exposures. No, so the question if I use Photoshop for the layers, you could do it manually, but for this type of stuff, it's much better to use this dedicated HDR software where that combines these for you automatically. Like Photomatics Pro. But yeah, the Aurora HDR, there's another one. That's another example of a vertical reflection shot. Stanford Hospital. Okay, so then think of it also instead of just the symmetrical, there is also asymmetrical balance, right? And so here the question is, how can I bring depth to a scene? And also, like when where can I walk around to get like better balance of foreground and background? So that's in Las Vegas Strip. It's asymmetrical, so it's basically all these diagonal lines and that converge in the back. That brings this dynamic, right? And in this case here, you see we have some foreground with the plant here, and the main subject is probably the stairs here. And so you have like vertical lines, you have like diagonal lines. So that's asymmetry, but overall it looks kind of balanced. Here, looking up, that's the same structure we have seen before. It's also asymmetrical, so it's a converging lines towards the top, but also it looks balanced. And here the message is, oh, it's a huge structure, and it looks even bigger because I'm relatively close to one of these legs of the.
In the previous one, all the verticals were perfectly vertical except the one on the left.
Yeah, in the previous one, all the legs of the bridge were all vertical except on the left, you mentioned, yeah. So actually all are total vertical. On the previous one, because of the fisheye lens, it was a little bit not parallel.
But you could have corrected it.
I could have corrected it in post, but I decided to leave it that way, yeah. Okay, the next one is radial and one-point perspective, right? So Stanley Kubrick, he was the master of the one-point perspective in his movies. So that's a one-point perspective or a radial shot, just looking straight up with a wide-angle lens. Here the same thing, but with the 210-degree wide-angle lens, right? And it's a circular lens. And here it looks almost if you would be inside a well and looking outside. Straight up, right? And okay, so here do we have, let's see, can we run this? That's actually a short video clip. How do we run that? That will be interesting. It's just a 1 minute something clip of Stanley Kubrick's one-point perspective, which is kind of interesting. Let's see here. No, I can't press start here. That's an offline version, huh, of the presentation. Yeah, okay, so I can't show it, but never mind. But if you look later on, if you go to the presentation, you can click and run it. Okay. Why can't I move forward?
You need to focus back on that presentation.
Ah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so now here, there's also a 1-point perspective shot that's in New York. I did that quite a while ago. And here in post, actually, I introduced that zoom effect. You could do that. Yeah, so you could do that directly in the lens, like while exposing a longer exposure shot, you can turn the focus. I mean, yeah, you can zoom, right? In this case here, it's a single shot. And then in post, there is a function in Photoshop and other software as well, where it can center, like point, choose a point where you want to blur the image radially, right? That's a hotel we stayed in Italy. Also 1-point perspective, right? And same hotel, the stairwell, right? So that's relatively big, so I couldn't reach out like this. So I basically used a tripod to extend my finger all the way out. So if this is the center here, I was like standing here and with a tripod like that. That's also the same town where the hotel is. That's also kind of a 1-point perspective, right? So all the lines converge like this, and then it just wanders off. And that's somewhere in Idaho. 1-point perspective as well. That's in Iceland, where John and I went. That's with a wide angle lens. I'm standing on a bridge, the glacial lagoon. And you see like all the lines, they basically converge, including the clouds, converge in 1 point. Next one is reflections. That's basically the same like the horizontal symmetry. So that's in San Francisco, totally still water after midnight. You couldn't tell, if you just look at this part here, you couldn't tell what is up and down. But because of the bridge here and what's below the bridge, you can tell. So you can have reflections on smooth water, so long exposure. You also can have reflection here on sand. That there was in low tide at the Marshall Beach in San Francisco. Low tide, so when the tide is going down, the beach is still wet. The water is running off, and you get these reflections, and then you get these stripes. Another example, Hakone Garden at night. You also can do it in daytime. Here, a bird shot, just walking around, minding its own business. And then don't forget about vertical reflections as well. Here, the glass, right? Which also can look interesting. Okay, this topic here, lights and shadows and backlight, that's very important. So if you want to experiment around, focus on this one. So the question is here, like, how can I use lights and shadows to make a scene more vibrant or more interesting to look at, right? And then also, if don't forget about backlight. So many people say, don't shoot against the sun. Well, it can be quite interesting if you shoot if you shoot in the direction of the sun. That's a night shot with full moon. So that's a reflection of the moon in the water. That's a backlight shot. So I'm shooting directly into the sun. I position myself so the sun is directly behind her head. So you get this radial, this gradient coming from the head, right? Which makes it look kind of interesting. That's in the upper Antelope Canyon near Page, Arizona. It's quite interesting. It's on private lands or Indian reservation, you have to join a tour to see that, but it's actually worthwhile. It's a little bit overrun. If you go, I recommend to go choose the time slot around noon, because then the sun is at the highest point, then you get these nice streaks of light.
Is that looking up into? I cannot.
Yes, so that's looking not totally straight up, but pretty much straight up. Yes, and that's just like the sun finds a path through, but it's very narrow valley, slot canyon, so not much sunlight hits the ground actually. And here, probably not. But yeah, so I can't remember if I used that. That was a couple of years back. So here, that's in my hometown. So that's actually the view from my mom's house. And that was just it was a rainy day. And it was just lighting up, or like the clouds were departing a little bit. 2 neighbors came to dinner at our place. And I took this shot. I just looked outside. Oh, that's great. You see like this dark, scary sky, right? But then the light here. So quite an interesting scene. Now let's compare that to a regular day. Same vantage point, right? Looks totally different. That doesn't look interesting, right? So that's in daytime. And there's no interesting light, maybe a little bit back there at the mountains, but otherwise, it's not that interesting, right? So again, if I go back, that looks way more interesting. Right? Yes.
What is the reason why you leave so much portion of the picture for the grass? The green grass?
On this picture here. So what the question is, well, what's the reason to leave such a big portion for the grass on the left? And we will talk about negative space later on. Yes, let me defer you later on negative space. Here, backlight shots through a tree in front of our house here. That's in Italy. I was just walking and noticed Dad and the son walking there, and I just had my camera ready. No time to prepare. But it's kind of interesting with the shadows here and that arch shadow as well. The Napa Valley, also backlight shot. Here in post, I highlighted this a little more than it actually looks naturally. So sometimes you can cheat a little bit, but I try not to cheat too much. In Japan, again, in one of these well-preserved old towns. And again, a backlight shot. It's a very nice play of light and shadow. So always look about where do I get lights and shadow, which makes the image, the scene always more interesting. That's approaching Zurich Airport. Again, kind of a backlight shot shortly before sunset. Everything in the cloud, and then this strange cloud here rising up, and that's a nuclear power plant in Aarau in Switzerland. That's local here, the Mount Hamilton over San Jose, Silicon Valley. So on a very plain, clear day, it's not interesting, not so interesting. Everything cloudy, could be interesting, and here was just perfect, right? So the overcast overhead, but clear where the sun is going down. Right? So sometimes you have to wait for the right moment. Same here. We were, that's in Bad Ragaz, like a resort town with spas. That's Liechtenstein behind this mountain in Austria on that side. That's in the east part of Switzerland, close to my hometown. And here also sunset. So you see part is already in the shade. Some is in the sunlight, which just plays quite nice together. So always think about lights and shadow. Here also close to sunset, Central Valley. Next topic is colors, the saturation and contrast. So you probably are familiar with the color wheel. So they're complementing colors like orange and blue. They're complementing each other. And then there's also called color palettes. So if you're a web designer, you're well aware of that. So you can use also some color palettes that work well together to choose in your scene. Right. Well, when you take photos, you don't have much choice, but you can walk around or wait for the proper light to get the light or the colors that you want. So here we have complementary colors, kind of saturated. It's not oversaturated, maybe a little bit because of HDR processing, but it's relatively natural. Well, actually at night, the human eye can't see colors that well. So it mainly sees black and white, right? Whereas the camera sees colors very clearly at night as well, just with a longer exposure. Right? That's why like night shots in cameras are more vibrant than what you actually see with your own eye. Here, also complementary colors, but the saturation is reduced on purpose. So that looks kind of interesting too. So think, do I want the high saturation or lower saturation, right? Or do I want to have rainbow colors, right? Here again, complementary colors, warm and cold. It's in Santa Cruz. And here, that's actually not a black and white shot, that's a color shot. But the saturation is reduced quite a bit. So that's a shot from Cessna, like a small aircraft with a long lens, downtown San Francisco.
Through the window of the aircraft.
Through the window of the aircraft, yes.
Usually those windows are dirty.
Usually the windows are dirty, yes. But if you're close to the window and your aperture is wide open enough, it will just blur out the dirt. So you won't notice it. Okay, so here another shot that with complementary colors, but kind of saturated colors, right? That can look interesting. Here we have in post, like I reduced all the colors like green and all the colors except for the warm tones and a little bit of blue, right? So the blues are low contrast and the warm colors are also less saturated as well. Again, warm and cold colors, low saturation. Here is middle saturation. When I took the shot that's in Chur, like the oldest town in Switzerland, the person had an umbrella of a different color. I forgot what color it was, but then in post, I tweaked the hue to make the umbrella yellow, right? Because that looks all nice like that. So here I cheated a little bit. So if I would do like documentary photography, that would be a no-no. But for artistic photos, sometimes cheating a little bit is fine. So here, that looks like an infrared shot. So usually you have to convert your camera for infrared to take infrared shots. This is actually just a regular color shot, and in post with an infrared filter, it fakes the infrared effect, which can look quite interesting too. So don't be afraid, like just play around with the colors to create something interesting. Okay, now there's also monochrome. So when should I use black and white or monochrome, right? So the main point is look at shapes and patterns. Sometimes it looks better in color, sometimes it looks better in black and white or monochrome. So this is actually a color shot. That's in the Black Rock Desert at night after launching rockets. So we launch high power rockets, right? And when people that mix their own fuel, some of the grains, rocket fuel grains, you can't use to shoot rockets. Something went wrong. So you have to dispose of it. Safest ways of disposal is to burn it, right? So in the evening, there's just a party of burning rocket fuel, right? And then there's an additive in the fuel that makes it look just red. So that's the only light source, red. That's why the picture is red. Now let's look here, this example with a fast lens, wide open in color versus black and white. So here I would say both look interesting, right? But it's also a matter of taste. Now in this case here, that's in Santa Cruz, Boardwalk, color version, and black and white. Here I would say the colors are probably more interesting, right? Here the footbridge in Cupertino that crosses the Highway 280 in color and black and white. I think both work quite well. You get a different message, right? That's footbridge in Felton towards Santa Cruz. I would say, or what do you think? Which one you prefer? The black and white, okay, and color. So yeah, so it's a matter of taste. In Switzerland, this one is almost black and white anyway. That's a good point. Yes, yes. That's a small village in Switzerland, close to my hometown, on a rainy day. Here, I would argue probably the black and white looks better. And that's also in Switzerland on a high pass road. Which one looks better, black and white or color? Debatable. If I would do the color post-processing again, I would tone down the blue in the sky. It's maybe a little oversaturated. This one here, lots of lights and shadows that I would argue definitely black and white works better. Also black and white here. I think both work color and black and white in this case. But one message or one point here, when you do monochrome, when processing, look at the contrast. It's usually better to increase the contrast in monochrome photos compared to the color version. So, but don't play with the contrast slider. Always use the curves. You know the difference? So yeah, with the contrast slider, if you increase the contrast, you're throwing away some part on the left and some part on the right, so you're losing information. And with the curve, the curve is anchored, so you don't lose anything, and you can play with the mid-tone or high tone or low tones, right? So I always use the curves, create an S curve to make the bright stuff brighter without losing stuff at the top, and the dark part darker. So here you see we have some complete black parts, which actually works well. Usually it's a no-no to have like total burn. You also have total burn here in the sky. But for black and white, it's actually better to have some burn or some totally black and some totally white. Longer exposure at Hakone Garden. Here, I also played with lights and shadows, right? That's actually, it looks like night, but it's actually a daytime shot. And in post, I darkened the back, like the surrounding, basically heavy vignetting, but manually applied vignetting. Like some cake with powder sugar on top, right? So it's a low saturation. So it's not black and white, but almost. Or monochrome, but almost. See, you see here that's kind of a purplish color, but here you still see a little green. Here it's almost black and white, with exception this jog here, right? But if you look on purpose, I didn't make it completely monochrome. So you see through the window, they're the cold colors. So outside is cold. So that's why this part here is also cold. But inside, the light inside is warm. Right?
Did you take many images and put them, stack them?
Here, I can't remember if it's a single image or multiple. Probably a single raw is sufficient here too. Because like outside, we don't see anything outside. So the contrast, just stuff inside isn't that big. So a single exposure is sufficient. Okay, now negative space. Let's speed up a little bit. So ask where should I apply a negative space and by how much, right? But then also ask, is negative space actually a negative space or is it part of the picture? So here, this example here, you see it's a rule of third on this side, but not so much on that side. So you can play around with this, but here we have lots of negative space. Negative space is stuff that doesn't contribute to the picture, has no information for the picture, but then supports the main topic, which is this this thing here. I don't know what you call it, light.
Is this a night shot or the day?
This is in daytime.
Daytime,
Yeah.
but you darken the.
Right. So this is in daytime, and then it's only the lamp is in the sunlight, and the rest is basically in the shade. And then I darken the stuff that's in the shade. Right. So here on purpose, I created my own negative space. So now, again, rocket in the desert. So I could take a shot with a long lens and just focus on the, point the camera directly at these two people carrying the rocket, right? But if you think about negative space, this looks much more interesting, right? That's because here you see in a vast landscape, right? Huge mountain, desert in the sun, mountain in the shade. You see just in this vast space, these two tiny people.
Also, it's more like a rule of third.
And yes, the question is also a rule of third, and that's correct. Yeah, so I also applied the rule of third here. Okay, lots of negative space that supports like the bicyclist here sitting, right? Big space. That's John in Iceland. We couldn't communicate, no cell phone connections there, and I was running around to try to get a good vantage point, and John was always running around, and I had to reposition. But finally, I got one shot, this shot here. So that's basically a big waterfall, right? Yeah, and so I zoomed in so that I don't get the top of the waterfall, which just brings the message, oh, John is standing here taking a shot of something huge, right? As a viewer, you don't know how far it goes up or left or right, right? So it's pretty much starts on the top there, but I cropped it off or by pointing the camera, but it's wider on the left and right.
When were you in Iceland?
We were in Iceland last year. Yep. And that was in June. June is a good time. Okay, so in this picture here, there's lots of negative space. But what's the main topic here? It's basically just these nice fluffy colors, right? So here negative space becomes part of the not negative space, which can be interesting too. Okay, one more thing about negative space. So with people or some action, what to do? Always open up space here or here. So here, I open, the person is looking to the, from our point perspective, to the right. So I open up more space on the right. Here to the left, here to the right again. here to the right again. Right. Here we were hiking up to the volcano, and it just happened in a split second. I just took the camera up to catch these riders. They were quite fast, and so I got enough open space here, but I just didn't have time to position my camera properly. So personally, I would have liked more open space at the bottom, because the direction here is from the central left to the lower right corner. So it would be good to have enough space on the left side and enough space at the bottom. Here you see the person is facing to our left. That's why I open up much more space to the left. Here, the ship wreck, the ship is facing right. That's why I open it up on the right side. Same here. Okay, silhouettes. So when you think about silhouettes, so do I want to have properly lit people or objects or silhouettes? And it depends. So here, that's boardwalk in Santa Cruz. I could have taken multiple shots, bracketed exposure for proper illumination of the people, but here I think it looks better as silhouettes. Here as well, wave reflection. Here as well for the lighthouse with the birds. That looks much more interesting with silhouettes. And here, John and I, we were at the at the racetrack playa in the Death Valley. I knew about, I had this scene in mind. So that's actually a playa, meaning dry lake bed. That's, there's underwater in winter, but dry in spring, summer, fall. And I had this shot in mind. So I asked John, okay, let's hike up on the mountainside to get a little higher vantage point to get a shot like this, right? And then lo and behold, 3 people walked up right there, and they were our models, and they didn't know that they were in the shot, right? And then these 2 people were always walking close to each other, and I was waiting, hey, even space out evenly, and then yeah, it happened. So sometimes you're just lucky. Same here, not planned, right? So we just stopped at the sand dunes in Death Valley, and then 2 people just happened to be on the top of a ridge. Now, shapes and patterns. So think of what shapes look interesting, that bring some dynamic into the scene or some balance, right? And then also patterns. What kind of patterns look interesting? Shapes. Look for S-curves. They bring some dynamic that always looks good, right? It's in Iceland. Here is an X, that's in the Black Rock Desert. On the way, we were on the way home, and then we stopped. John actually had the idea to stop right where this dip here meets this mountain range, right? So we get kind of an X, right? Which makes it look interesting. Always look for other shapes as well, like triangles, squares, rectangles, and also don't be afraid to turn the camera sideways. But pay attention, like if you intend to have it straight, but it's not totally straight, if the horizon doesn't look straight, then the photo looks like you don't pay attention. But here it's tilted quite a bit, so it's obvious that's done intentionally. So play around with this. Now here you see all these stripes, right? That's another shape, but it's also a pattern. So sometimes you can combine, you have both shapes and patterns. Patterns, like repeating patterns, like here the yellow, then repeating patterns of the palm trees.
Short tree, tall tree.
Short trees, tall trees, yes. Here just a detail of the playa in the Black Rock Desert. Looks almost like an aerial view of Paris with the big roads and the small roads. That's just at sunrise or sunset, right? That's why you get the structure, texture. In the Swiss Alps, above my hometown, early in the morning, the sun just came up. You get these nice patterns here in the shadow. In San Francisco, lots of patterns, repeating patterns.
Were you kind of low down?
Yes, so here the camera was basically on the floor. And so you get more reflection on the water, but also more reflection on a semi-glossy surface like a table or floor. The lower you go, the more reflections you get. Yeah, so again, patterns. Yeah, so here, this bicycle also by color nicely matches. So with a pattern, it's always good to have repeating patterns, but then also something that disrupts the pattern. That's the icing on the cake, right? So here the disruption is that little bicycle. Other patterns here. More patterns. That's in Japan. More patterns here. Animals, that's in the Central Valley. Sunset. More patterns here, repeating. Shapes and patterns. Here there's also an example of San Francisco. Just a wall repeating patterns and with a disruption in the pattern. And also here, mainly triangle patterns with a disruption at the straight tower. Okay, motion blur. So how can you bring or show motion in a picture? Then also, do I want to pan with the subject or make the subject blurry? That's like motion blur. Here, that's in the airport shuttle. The title is Riding with Friendly Ghosts. That's in Zurich. So you get these patterns on the facade of the building. And there's a reflection in that tram, in the train.
The previous one, was that motion done in post or in the camera? Not this one, the previous one.
The previous,
Yeah.
that's that is like this.
Okay.
Yeah, I need to speed up. That's in a double-decker bus in Hong Kong. You see, it's just a single shot, longer exposure. Here, the tripod that's in Las Vegas. The tripod is on that escalator, which turns like around like that. So the person is sharp. Everything else is totally blurry. That's at the powwow, everything blurry, which might be interesting too. At a wedding, everything blurry. Here's a blur introduced by turning the zoom on the lens. Now, long exposure versus short exposure. Here I choose long exposure and here short exposure. Long exposure here just makes the water white. Here's the actual shot that I mentioned before. Long exposure, so the water is totally blurry. Short exposure. Now bokeh and lens flare. So here, that's the only compositional element where you do need actually a real camera and with fast lens. Everything else you can do with cell phones as well. So that's with a 0.95 lens. That's with a 2.8 lens. So some bokeh looks like three-dimensional, kind of roundish shape, right? The texture. Other bokeh is totally flat with a ring around. So you get different types. That's also a bokeh with a 0.75 lens. I have a couple lenses here. You can look later if you like. That's a 0.7 lens where it looks like a pencil drawing. Then you also get like these lens defects, like flares, lens flares here with rainbow. So that's the actual lens that produces this. You get lens flares like from bright light source. You can use it as a compositional element. If you close the aperture totally down to the lowest, then you get like these star patterns. That works pretty much with any lens. Now we have to combine these elements. I think we will skip that. You can look later through the presentation and see where, like what elements do we use here, different elements, maybe just one here. What do we see here? Quick, what do you see? Reflection, yes. Single point, like a 1 point perspective. Symmetry, yes.
Repetition of form.
Repetition of form, yep. What else?
Very nice picture.
Very nice picture, thank you. Disruption, excellent, yep.
Cold and hot colors.
Warm colors, yes, complementary colors, yep. Okay, so now let's skip all this. Tangible or the intangible now. We're way behind time.
You're in your 15 minutes of Q&A. So there's
Yeah.
15 minutes there.
15 minutes left. Okay, so now the intangible ones. Think about entry point, leading lines, and exit point. So where does the viewer look first? And then where do the eyes wander and where do we leave the scene? So in this picture here, maybe first you see the church, maybe afterwards you see the rainbows, right? Oops. Here, you have a clear entry point on the left. You have this nice S curve, and exit point is just around the corner where the S disappears. Same here, right? S curve, these buildings, and maybe the mountains, and to the right, you wander off. Here, it's like hiking, nice S curve, you're disappearing there, right? Always think about where does the eye start to look, where does it wander, what's the path, and where does it exit? Here as well. Here as well. Maybe exit is the moon. That's maybe a little questionable. What is entry point? What is the path? What is exit point? It could be on the left, like you start on the left here and then go, but it is the other direction of the train. So maybe you first look at the tunnel and then come this way. So it's not always clear. Now, minimalistic versus busy. So how much should I reduce a scene to its very essence? And usually less is more, right? Or like, in other words, like how much detail or complexity do I want to leave in the picture? Like, where is Waldo? So here, that's very simple image, right? It's kind of minimalistic, but you still have some texture in it. This one here looks kind of busy, right? And there's no entry point, no exit point. It's just all over the place. It's a big blob in the middle, right? This is very minimalistic. That's from Mount Tam, the Farallon Island. Thank you. That's in Hong Kong. That's kind of interesting with the gate, like a night market. But if you zoom in more, that looks maybe more interesting. It's also nice patterns, less details. But also you could argue like left side could be interesting too. You maybe spend more time looking at the picture at the left. So it's a judgment call. Here, nice, whoops, nice picture, but there is a lot of stuff going on. Okay, let's turn 180 degrees around. Looks like this. Okay, a little better. Okay, how does it look in black and white? Oh, that actually looks much more pleasing, right? It's less busy, right? So think about how busy do I want to have a scene. Here, a lesser known waterfall in Iceland. The full view of the waterfall, but if you zoom in a lot, looks like this. It's simple, right? But looks kind of big. It looks much bigger than it is, right? That's also simplicity. Maybe if I would do the post-processing again, maybe I would cut away some of the noise down here. That's also kind of simplistic, right? Minimalistic. This one too. Now here, it's a lot going on. You could say, okay, warm stuff on top, cold stuff at the bottom, but there's a lot of stuff going on. Now let's crop it. It looks much more pleasing. Now, surrealistic and abstract. So do I want to be realistic or more like René Magritte? And also in post, how much post-processing should I do? Sometimes you don't need to do much. I simply turn the camera, oh no, in post, I turn the picture by 90 degrees, right? It's like you're falling off the cliff. But it's just a turn in an airport shuttle. So here that became a tradition every year when we go out to the desert launching rockets. I take along this comfy chair, and a friend took along Jeff Bezos' puppet as a payload for one of his rockets. So I thought, okay, let's do that shot. So that also doesn't take much preparation, right? Here, Steve Jurvetson, we always hang out launching rockets together. So he came one day later. I asked him to buy a Wall Street Journal so that we can take this picture. So somebody took this sofa, and then I had this picture in mind. Oh, okay, let me call Steve. So I texted him, hey, bring along a Wall Street Journal. He's the main investor in SpaceX and Tesla. So that's why the connection with Wall Street Journal. So that was kind of fun. So now, but if you do a surrealistic shot, it takes a lot of preparation. So I had this shot in mind for a long time. And then when we went to launch rockets, half a day we reserved to take the shot, right? So I bought this chair for that reason. I asked her to buy a dress. I would pay her for the dress from my son. Then we bought this long scarf, right? And a friend went and threw this up in the air and stepped out of the picture, and I took shots. And I took many shots until one where, then I selected one where we had a nice curve. Right? So the title here is Waiting for the Train That Never Came. So these types of shots take some preparation here as well, right? So she was standing on a stool, and then I photoshopped the stool out. So the shadow is real, just I photoshopped away the stool. Here I photoshopped away her feet. Here, post-processing, right? So I blurred the trees in the back, right? Which makes it look kind of interesting. Very sharp in the front, but blurry in the back. It's a motion blur. So you have Gaussian blur, but here it's a motion blur in one direction, straight up. But then there was quite some work to make it look right where we have blurry stuff and non-blurry stuff. Then here, that's very simple, just through a car window with a fast lens, right? Focusing on the raindrops. Same here. Now, that's out of camera shot, and that's a very painterly HDR version. See, out of camera, painterly, right? It's oversaturated on purpose, and then almost like strokes of paint, right? That's the painterly effect that you can achieve with HDR post-processing. Okay, so now be in the flow, be curious and playful. So key question, how can I free myself from the habits all us grown-ups have? A child is very curious, always discover stuff that we never would see, right? And then also, how can we be in the flow when we take photos? Are you familiar with to be in the flow? So like, let's say free, like the mountain climber that climb without gear. They prepare like a very long time, and then the day they go out without gear climbing up a mountain, they're totally in the flow. I mean, they're totally focused, and nothing can go wrong. For them, nothing can go wrong, right? They have to think that way, right? And with photography, you can also get into the flow. So now, this is Jerry Downs, a friend of mine. He lives also in the Bay Area. He basically, when he was small, he decided never to grow up. And he's acting like that when he's out taking photos, right? He's very creative. That's him again, contemplating. That's one of his shots. He was just waiting for a person with a red umbrella, right, on a rainy day. Red. Here we were just playing around with feet, like blurry shots. Here at work, I had the camera with me. I've seen the cleaning lady. I just decided to wait, take repeated shots of the cleaning lady in the window like 4 times. So just play around. Here I put a cardboard in the middle of the lens, in front of the lens. That makes like these googly eyes, but these are bokeh, right? Just play around. Here, first on tripod, long exposure, and then I took the camera up and just did like that. So just play around. Here I had like this LED light with the vent holes in the back, and I just walked on the track like that, long exposure. So just free yourself from the chains of adulthood, grown-ups. Like Rock Desert. Here, just combining a close-up shot of the ground, then a further away shot of me, same angle, same time of day. Here, straight up in Hong Kong. Here, I decided to put the LED like lights in back of this at the beach that has in Iceland that has these. What is it called? This beach? Diamond Beach. Yes. So ice is just beached on the beach, and I put the lights there. That's John. That's me. Just play around. You can play around with colors as well. You can wait until a person just shows up, and then you create a star gate here in post, like that. That's blurred in post. That's long COVID situation, always at home, just start to experiment. Experiment, play. Okay, now serendipity and synchronicity. What's the difference? It's almost the same. Serendipity is something happens by accident. I'm lucky, right? The synchronicity is something happens, or just it has to happen like this. It's not other possible. Like people meet each other by coincidence, but it had to happen like this, right? It's destiny. So now here, I was taking pictures. I saw this truck, and then I was, oh, there's a cloud. Okay, the right moment. So now it looks like cloud coming, like exhaust of the truck. Here, same thing, like exhaust from the rocket that failed and slammed into the ground. Whoops. Here, I was taking sunset shots of a wine glass. A friend was coming down with his drone and by accident hit my glass, but it became a beautiful shot, interesting shot, just play. That was just by a coincidence. And so here in the middle of nowhere, we saw this chair and okay, that looks kind of interesting. Here, I was waiting for a long time. That's in Japan, Monkey Park with hot spring. And then just mom with the baby came out. Now build emotional connection. So ask what kind of emotions can I evoke with the viewers, right? And there are, in fact, 27 emotions that we have. You probably can skip some of them, but yeah, always think about what kind of emotional connection can I bring. Here, maybe father and son, right? That's before an important dance, initiation dance, right? The father makes sure that everything is in proper order. Mahjong at a party. Here, the cramped space in Hong Kong, just looking straight up. Here, like just a big tree, like oh. Here, emotional connection, like with dogs or with animals. Here, maybe husband and wife. You don't know, but that's maybe what people think.
I know which one is the wife, though.
You know? Here, at the book release parties. So that's Oliver Klink, famous photographer. He is local here. At their book release party. So actually all three worked on that book. And that's one of his famous photos. And it looks like at the theater, like what he wrote here. Maybe you can read later, but everything fits together, like these goats playing, people watching, right? So everything comes together. That's yeah, we were staying a very long time at this library in St. Gallen in Switzerland. We had dinner. No, there was lunch in a castle. Let's skip that. Now tell the story. That's the last one. So always think of what story does my composition tell, or what kind of composition can I do so that it tells a story. Another way put. So here, what's the story? Like preparation for a big party in the backyard, right? Sun is going down. Here, approaching the cables of Half Dome, right? Here, youth, like play. I'm free, right? Here, tourists, like taking photos, interesting looking. Here, you see the smoke here, that's from the wildfire, so that evokes a story. It's up to you what you think what the story here is. It's like a 3,000-year-old tree. Black Rock Desert, the rocket camp, with the burning the rocket fuel, the stars. That's straight up shot, no composition, but it tells a story. You can also create a story like here. On the same day, we did this shot, then later on this. Right, so that was with preparation, with flour. So you can create a story as well. Story here, it's cold, right? Here's John. So I could have focused just now. I actually have shots also of just the volcano, but I think this one is much better. It tells a story, right? Here, Hong Kong, a back alley, tells a story. Hong Kong again, playing in a very cramped space. Here, Hong Kong's freedom of press that's being eroded, right? She was demonstrating. Here, the protests in Hong Kong. Blue, which is the color of police in Hong Kong. Yellow, which is the color of the protesters. So blue is stepping on yellow, right? That's a story. Here at the photo shoot I did at Hakone Garden, families could pose. This girl, the daughter, didn't want to pose, so she was just running around, and so I said, okay, let's just take a photo of mom. But then just by coincidence, she was running around, and then she looked at the camera. Okay, so that's basically it. So we really drank from the fire hose. So you don't need to remember everything, but you now got a good base. Look up the presentation once in a while, right? So to reference the stuff. Now, how to learn. So it's basically a process. So it's just practice, practice, practice. I set yourself a goal. My personal goal that might not work for you is I want to go out once a week to shoot and post one nicely processed HDR photo a day. That's my goal. Just set whatever goal you want, but set one that's achievable, right? Then regularly watch other photographers' work on Flickr, etc. You can join local meetups. You can join photo walks. And yeah, be a child. Put yourself into a child's mind. And also find the beauty around you. And if you're in the flow, the beauty finds you. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was a fire hose and so many beautiful compositions. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I ran over a little bit, but yeah, hopefully it was worthwhile.
Well, we need to close the store. So any final questions? And I'll ask in case there's any questions online.
Some evaluation forms to give out.
Oh, thank you.
And there's a raffle.
Over to Dom and Louis, one of our members is going to raffle off a prize. It could be a prize for members, which is a gift check to the store, or it could be a prize for non-members, which is a membership.